Thanks, Andrea and Gary, for the opportunity to present at this year's ISCIA Seminar on this artistic project called Horizon 2020-2055. So the art project that I want to present is called Entanglement. It's a science fiction story that has to do with these creatures, machines called tangles that come to the Earth from another civilization. And it's a chance for me to draw on the work that I've done for 25 plus years now in visual arts, plastic arts, as well as science fiction and architecture to engage AI and large language models for this project. Everything that you'll see, except for the early forms that were made old school on pen and paper, were developed using large language models, including the movie. And then obviously, yes, as well, grounding it in the complexity sciences to explore this question, can art transform our future, which I do believe it can. So the presentation is organized in two parts. It's a 10-minute movie called Entangled, and then a 15-minute overview of 15 minutes or less on how I developed the artistic project, and then we'll open it up to a bit of a chat. Because of the challenges associated with running video in a Zoom environment or Teams environment, I've recorded this for those who were not at the seminar, and you will have to watch it in two parts. So this is the discussion part, the background part, but you need to go to YouTube, which this video is on as well, to watch the actual movie. It's called Entangled, a visual complexity artwork for reimagining ecological futures. And you can go directly to the link right here, the YouTube link. I do want to, again, reiterate that the science fiction story Entangles were created using ChatGPT and other large language models. The narration was, again, virtual creation using 11 labs. And the soundtracks were created by Epidemic Sound. These are soundtracks created by real people. It's in the Creative Commons, but I still feel as an artist, I want to acknowledge my colleagues. So it's Between Spaces, Beyond the Badlands, Earth, Solar Stream, and We Are the Visitors, which I drew on. Unless they were my friends, the figures in this art piece, the people were all generated using AI with no likeness to any real human being. And all of the art is copyrighted Brian Castellani through the Art and Science Factory Limited Liability Company, which I run for my art work. So let's get into this discussion about how did I do what I did. First, I want to talk about visual complexity as a form of method. For me, art is ultimately about aesthetics. That's my own view. I see art as deeply emotional and existential. However, I also feel that art is a research tool. Visual arts are research tools for exploring the complexity of our lives. I remember Picasso had famously said that all pictures that he did, all pieces of art he did were research. He was always exploring. And I try to do the same in my art. So it is art as method, a form of visual case-based complexity, drawing out of my case-based complexity approach. Most people think of the computational or mixed methods that I do with qualitative as well, but the visual is there also, and has been a strong part of the work that I've done over the years. My approach is called assemblage, which draws off of Rauschenberg and other folks that have used that approach. And I explore a lot of the same topics I do in my scientific work. Inequality, power, social interaction. My work does, however, my artwork tends to be a little bit more psychologically and existentially focused, exploring the self and relationships between ourselves and the worlds we live in. As far as creating the movie Entanglement, which you hopefully will watch or have watched, the process began, it came up in the 80s as an artist using traditional media, pencil, ink, oil, photography, pastels, acrylic, printed photographs. And these forms became narrative. It was, what if art didn't just represent sustainability, it could be this idea of justified healing. So for me, Liu Cixin in particular is a huge influence on me. I love science fiction, and his work on the three-body problem, Dark Forest, and what's the last one, Death's End, just pure genius. So I was inspired by a lot of that. Here's some examples of the actual tangles that I started with. Please take a note of this top left one, because later I'll show you what the AI sculpture looked like generated, and as well as the one on the right. But again, these were just done old-fashioned way, just using crayon, charcoal, pen, pencil, paper, acrylics, so forth. And looking in various platforms or setups for the artwork. Then I took that, and then I began to interact a few months back. This is in 2025. Spring of 2025, I began working with ChatGPT and other large language models to try to explore this visual narrative. So the first thing that I did was I took the images and I uploaded them and said, let's create wire sculptures. Let's try different types of scale, use different types of materials. And it was a really interesting process. And then once I created those, then I began to say, okay, well, here's some photographs that I have, some photography of South Africa, Nelson Mandela Bay. Could we put these together to begin to create this story? And as you saw or will see, you know, it turned into the pieces in the movie. I did want things to be as reasonably real science as possible, or speculative science. So I wanted it on the edge there, so that it wasn't just ridiculous science fiction. And then as far as architecture goes as well, and urban design, I very much tried to bring into the creation process the influence of three architects, artists, designers that have, you know, just amazing to me, which is Fujimoto, Hundertwasser, and Saraceno. And two pieces in the movie at the end, these sort of installation architectures were a direct response to Fujimoto's Tokyo exhibition in July 2025, which I had the good fortune to see. And as I said, 11 labs generated the movie, and then Epidemic Sound to create soundtrack. Again, huge influence by Brian Eno. So using the large language models, it was a ride. Really trying to push these tools as far as they could. And there are places, the more complex things got, the more expectations I had around the realism of the situation, the less well I did about explaining to it what I wanted. And then the pure spontaneity of just things happening, you know, writing it in, typing it in, uploading the images I want, sitting back and just waiting. And as the screen just sort of went down the image, to see the image come out. And sometimes I just couldn't believe it. I just thought, wow. Other times, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing I've ever seen. But it really is, even though it is large language modeling, is using natural language, it is still programming. I very much drew on my skill set from back in the days in the 80s of using BASIC, and then also programming for statistical software like SPSS. Also very much needing a photographer's eye around lighting, atmosphere, exposure, cropping, you know, really thinking a lot about not just the art pieces themselves, but then how would these art pieces go into making the art movie. So everything you're looking at here in the next few slides are all virtual. They don't actually exist. Now, a goal is to create an actual installation where these things would be. I would spend the time, you know, the next several months or so making these things real. But these are creations from the machine as a function of me interacting with it. And again, you can see the pieces here to the left, which I originally said, hey, look at that left and right piece, where it you know, it's bringing in felt and wire and all these sorts of things to create that image in 3 dimensions. Again, the one on the left there is the other one I told you to take note of. And I actually want to make that. I think it would just be so exciting to take it that far and see the large language modeling as an artistic tool that then I got on the other side of something that I don't know if I would have otherwise, or what would have happened had I done it differently. And then even right down to thinking about installations. and how would I put this in a three-dimensional environment? What potentially could that look like? And then breaking them apart and thinking about the various pieces, parts. It was a lot of fun doing this. It's very inspiring and challenging. It doesn't go fast just because you're using these tools. The art process wasn't really any faster in a lot of ways. It was still a lot of trial and error, making mistakes, not getting what you wanted, and just keep pushing for perfection to get the things that I'm trying to get at. And in that way, it was the same time frame. So this wasn't a way to cheat the timing of doing this work. It was just really a new tool. So again, to the ultimate question of this, seminar series, what in the end do I think this art can help do? First, foster a social complexity imagination, which, for those of you know, my Atlas of Social Complexity that I wrote with Lasse Gerrits really is trying to push for. Then this idea of a new paradigm of not just responsive systems, but responsive beings, hybrid forms of that dissolve the line between architecture and organism, technology and ecology. And then, a future where transport can be grown, not built. Communication devices adapt to emotional states. Just thinking very radically. Again, I said I tried to be as much in the science as I could, but also pushing beyond the boundaries. What comes after the large language models in this AI era that we're in? Does it become more organic? What happens? And that goes to this next point of moving past sustainability as stasis into regeneration. And then the idea of thinking about these different forms of architecture, urban spaces, creations, not just minimizing our ecological impact, but actually healing. And that this idea, again, which has come up through the seminar repeatedly, is a co-evolutionary act between us, each other, and the environments in which we live, the other living beings in those environments. And that takes us to this ethical point of this responsibility to nurture and take care of things that take care of us. And finally, something we've nearly forgotten in the current political climate, and again, Leos Sission's work pushes this, is that there are moments when we can become pessimistic or eras of pessimism and doubt. But the reality is we can change the world we're in. We are capable of this. We can change how we live. And I think art has always asked us to take that into consideration in its own way. So with that, I'll stop and we can have a bit of a chat.